With Nintendo Direct hype reaching fever pitch, and after a series of videos on this channel that go into all different aspects of what Nintendo may have to show and may keep back, after reflecting on Metroid, Zelda, Mario, and the entirety of the 2026 lineup, finally it's time to address what the shape of the actual Direct presentation could be. Not necessarily the full meal of what's to come this year, because I think we should look at this Direct as the starting whistle rather than the finish line of the promotional process for the next 6 to 12 months. But I think it is time to look at what this specific presentation might entail in itself. At this point, I'm going to take as read that there is something coming in the week ahead, simply because Nintendo Directs generally do arrive with a fair bit of buzz in advance of this nature. And so while I have skepticism of the rumour mill as a rule, I think in this case we're looking at something pretty significant happening. I also don't expect a partner showcase or a mini. This feels like the time for a full-fledged Nintendo Direct from Nintendo, both to promote their lineup of imminent titles and to reveal a good number of first-party games. When Nintendo were doing more frequent presentations, Directs often had only 3 or 4 first-party reveals, but I think we're now looking at least that amount here, and possibly many more. As I've covered in previous videos, there is a lot they could announce, but there's also a lot they may want to keep back for various reasons, so let's start by seeing what routine announcements might show up. Firstly, the films. It wouldn't surprise me to see a cameo from Miyamoto, given the movie situation and the fact that they may want to do a victory lap and promote the Super Mario Galaxy film before it completely disappears from the cinemas. But I suspect the core presentation will probably be by Yoshiaki Koizumi, who now seems to have taken over from Shinya Takahashi as the regular presenter with the advent of Switch 2. However, news from the Zelda film feels contingent to me, as with so much, on whether or not they want to get into the Zelda 40th now or wait until September. I think some kind of Zelda mention, if only the film being wrapped, feels probable. I also think they may want to raise the profile of some past games, whether Tomodachi Life, Pocopia, Mario Kart World, or indeed Metroid Prime 4. I think there are games which they would like to raise the salience and encourage some sales. While I'm still dubious on paid DLC for Mario Kart World, this is obviously a big focus, and recent advertisements have particularly emphasized Pocopia, while Tomodachi Life is something that they really want to push, making all these games likely candidates for continued attention, even in the form of free updates. Now, these don't necessarily need to be focused on during a Nintendo Direct, but this might be one place that they could give them extra attention. As for Metroid Prime 4, I've already said previously that a Dread-style small patch to try to raise the profile of the game and shift their remaining stock feels like a decent shout to me. On the other hand, I feel like they've probably done their tour of Duty with Bonanza, so that's one title I don't necessarily expect to see more from at this point. One way to bring these all back would be with some Amiibo though. I'd say Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave Amiibo are likely to feature, and Star Fox Amiibo would seem like obvious choices to announce right now. We already know that Splatoon Raiders has a few very nice looking Amiibo indeed. Obviously, newly announced games could also receive Amiibo, and I do think we will see something Amiibo themed during the presentation. One thing I didn't also cover in my past videos, but which was raised in the comments of a previous one by Helmslock, was the prospect of a new revival of a long dormant property getting an opportunity. The overall odds of old properties getting a new makeover aren't enormously high, although sometimes, as with March 2025, we do get two at once, Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven in that case. Kirby Air Riders arguably counts as well from the April showcase. I think there are a whole range of potential properties still for Nintendo to bring back, even though the lower hanging pieces of fruit have been snaffled. Pushmo, Fossil Fighters, Wario Land, and Dr. Mario feel quite plausible collectively, although not necessarily individually, and in all cases, I think these will make landfall on Switch or Switch 2 over the coming years, and I've actually covered all of these in prior videos. Punch-Out I've also covered in a separate video, and may have a narrow route to a return, but it still feels like a low chance, while Eternal Darkness, Custom Robo, Pilot Wings, and Kid Icarus feel like far longer shots. But again, I have covered some of these, particularly Kid Icarus, in recent months, and I think there is a very, very narrow opportunity for Kid Icarus to come back, given that its creator is still, at least for the time being, and possibly for another couple of years until his retirement age, at the company. Given Sin Sophia's apparent failure with Fashion Dreamer to make a big impact outside of the Style Stabby franchise, a smaller scale Style Stabby game does feel like a plausible option, but still as a long shot call. Let's talk Nintendo Switch Online. Nintendo have pushed this quite a bit recently with Virtual Boy in September and the GameCube coming to Switch 2 at launch. I don't think they urgently need to have more added at this point, although perhaps some of the deeper cut consoles like Game & Watch Satellaview, and for that matter, some of the Sega consoles could appear in the Nintendo Classics line. I do have a separate video recorded but not yet edited, which will now probably have to release after the Direct, addressing the prospect of what they could do with DS, including potential, of course, for some kind of physical version of the DS, just like they have controllers for all their various older consoles. I think DS will probably be a way off yet, and obviously there are a great many different ways that they could approach it. I do think, though, that there will be a fairly significant rejig of Nintendo Switch Online either this year or probably at this point next to incorporate a price increase, and they may not want to annoy people on price in September right before a console price hike as well. That said, I think the fact that Switch 2 is increasing in price will probably cause them to hold off. Then to Nintendo Switch 2 editions. There seem to be 6 major buckets for the Nintendo Switch 2 editions and what they're going to do with Switch games. The first bucket are those that won't have any further support, usually because they have been superseded or are incompatible in some way with Switch 2 as it stands. So Splatoon 2, Ring Fit Adventure, and Mario Tennis Aces are just some of these examples. Then there's a second group of games which could receive a glow up at some point in the future, but at present the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze. So I'm thinking games like Paper Mario the Origami King and Sushi Strikers, both of which could conceivably be revisited, but I don't think there's a huge demand for either. Thirdly, there are titles which they want to be front and centre of the Switch 2 conversation, but where they have other plans, and so they've gone or are going with free patches instead. Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and Captain Toad Treasure Tracker feature in this group. Therefore, the bulk of Nintendo Switch 2 editions come from 2 of the remaining 3 buckets. One is the mega hit games that they want to fast track to the new console, like Animal Crossing New Horizons and Super Mario Party Jamboree. Plus, I think you can put Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which was huge for Kirby, into this category. And there's also a bucket for recent titles that were possibly conceived with a Nintendo Switch 2 plan as part of their marketing cycle, even when they originally released, such as Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, and although it wasn't a full Nintendo Switch 2 edition, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, which did get fairly significant upgrades for the Switch 2 earlier this year. Of the former lists, the obvious candidate for a Nintendo Switch 2 edition or a full sequel in terms of massive mega hit games are Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Switch Sports, and Luigi's Mansion 3, although at a push you could cudgel in Super Mario Odyssey with the Bonanza team working on a Quickie Plus game, while the core team at EPT8 continue on the next game. All feel at least somewhat plausible, but all could equally just see sequels instead, and I think probably that's where most of them will end up. Pikmin 4 had lower sales, but on the Forgotten Land principle that Pikmin 4 was huge for the Pikmin property, its numbers might make it another good shout for a Nintendo Switch 2 edition sooner rather than later, although I do think a Pikmin spin-off is a decent shout, albeit probably not a Pikmin 5 just yet. Of the next category, the recent games which were conceived with Nintendo Switch 2 development in mind, we're probably looking at titles like Princess Peach Showtime, Mario and Luigi Brothership, Tomodachi Life, perhaps even Bayonetta 3, and despite the loss of Soliani, Ubisoft's Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, where apparently Nintendo did advise Ubisoft to wait for the next system rather than rushing out a sequel on the same console when the initially disappointing sales started to come in. The last bucket of games that they may explore, though, are games which are extremely niche properties but would be guaranteed a very low baseline of sales, as well as ensuring that these titles are in fine form for a generation to come, on the principle that having these niche games broadens the library out, and they can eventually make back a significant amount of money if the titles are available for potentially the next decade or even more if the next system is backwards compatible with the Switch as well. Astral Chain, Metroid Prime Remastered, Metroid Dread, New Pokemon Snap, and more fit into this category. None of them particularly large games in their own right, but all of them could have some significant purchase in the Switch 2 library. Before we get to Switch 2, we should probably consider the dear old Nintendo Switch though. Nintendo confirmed in November 2025 that they were moving on from Switch game development, and their behaviour in 2025 certainly showed this, from the 7-month drought of Switch 1 titles in the middle of that year to announcing Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven over a year ahead of time to prove that they still had Switch games in mind, while low-key proving that their focus was actually elsewhere. However, it's likely that there will be projects already in development. With the 3DS, we saw games continuing to release more than 2 years after the Switch arrived, so I don't think that they're going to cut their losses with Switch just yet. Kirby has a particular affinity for holding up the rear of games consoles, multiple times from the NES to the 3DS having been the last first-party release in many territories, but I'm not sure we're quite at the Kirby stage yet of the system's lifespan. My suspicion is that there will be at least one cross-gen Zelda title this financial year as well. I'm struck by the Triforce Heroes art recently on Nintendo Today, but of course there are many possibilities, including A Link Between Worlds and various other games. But also I think something like Star Savvy could still fit in as an original Switch title, and something of that kind of scale is what I expect to see. Okay then, let's talk Switch 2 games. I've already said that my overall expectation is that on balance, we won't get a Zelda Blowout until September, although obviously it's a pretty dicey call as it could go either way. The more I think about it though, I just think there is plenty of precedent of Nintendo doing incredibly short notice reveals and releases, just 15 days between the Mario 35th Direct on the 3rd of September 2020 and Super Mario 3D All-Stars games release on the 18th of September of that year. A 1st or 2nd of September Direct featuring a new 40th anniversary or Ocarina modelled Switch 2 for a release on September 17th or 24th or even October the 1st feels absolutely plausible to me, and of course Ocarina doesn't need a lot of advertising. I did see a good comment from Politiclank in the comment section of a previous video that actually Nintendo might benefit from having Ocarina of Time in order to promote the Switch 2 system, and while that's true, I think if they can have a solid Direct without Zelda, and I think that is completely possible, then I don't necessarily think that they need to bring out Ocarina of Time just yet. But if they are going down the Zelda route, do they want to tease Ocarina beforehand and have a shorter reveal before the main presentation in September? I just don't know if it feels necessary to do this. Through Nintendo Today, they've cultivated a huge existing audience, and a surprise drop will drive massive hype, especially when people can make snap purchasing decisions. It will also continue to sell throughout the film's release cycle, and they could even repeat what they did with Metroid Prime Remastered and shadow drop the actual game on the 1st of September, and then follow up with physical copies later in the month. My sense remains that there's not all that much more for them to be gained by trailing Ocarina now, when they can make such a massive and decisive splash a few months from now. All that said, if there is a big Zelda blowout in this coming Direct, my previous expectations would remain in place. Zelda film news, Zelda theme park news, potentially some kind of app, almost certainly a second and perhaps even third game announcement, one of which would probably be for Switch 1, plus some merchandising news as well. I think they're going to hit this anniversary really hard. However, this does mean that we would have to consider two different branching paths of probability with what will happen with this next Direct. Now, I don't think Nintendo want or need to push every single button on the dashboard at once. The one they probably need to hit more than any other is revealing the next 3D Mario, but of course, if they do have a massive Zelda focus, then I think they may feel that they don't actually have to dip into the well of Mario just yet, and they can keep quiet. However, enough time has passed since Bonanza that they won't be eclipsing that prior game, and they can get to sail through the promotional wave of the film and hype people up for Switch 2, driving sales even before release if they do make a big Mario announcement now. We know they're willing to tease their absolutely hugest games a long way out when needed. Look at the 4-year wait for the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and indeed look at the reveal of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave at the end of the previous Direct, even though it seems to have been at least a year out. And of course, it's something that did give a nice cap to that previous Direct when they didn't have a lot else to reveal at that stage. So I've already said that a 3D Mario reveal is far more likely than not, and I think probably for this year. It's even possible that they could avoid giving a date entirely, which would open the possibility of it even being a 2028 game, but as long as what they show is pretty incredible, I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be too critical. I don't think this will put them off a reveal at this stage, but if it is going to be a long way off, or at least if that's the insinuation, then it would obviously mean that they're going to need a far stronger lineup for 2026 at the present time. So I think if Mario is the headline game of the Direct, then Zelda probably sits out and they pivot to concentrating on the line of new Mario games, which I've broadly covered in a previous video. Mario Maker feels like the safest shout probably, but there's quite a range of different possibilities. A second game tying into the film, much like Princess Peach Showtime's reveal in 2023, also feels reasonably safe. 2 or 3 big Mario reveals in total would make this a fairly significant Mario showcase, but also an effective bookend for the 40th anniversary run before they move on. That allows the rest of the lineup to either be smaller in sales potential or smaller in hype footprint, but still quite significant. Shout out to channel regular again, Politiclank for the second time in the comments, for pointing out something I hadn't considered but which seems oddly plausible, putting the next big Kirby as the 2026 holiday title. Air Rider's sales were low but hugely Japan focused, while Forgotten Land was high in terms of its sales in all regions, and the sequel is, if not overdue, then at least due. HAL has long made the end of the financial year their go-to slot, but I'm sure they wouldn't turn their nose up at a more prestigious slot, such as an October window, or even indeed a November slot, to take on GTA Barbenheimer style, a suggestion in the comments again from David Titanium. All these things considered then, I think that the banner reveals will be a 3D Mario for 2027, something Metroid and probably Metroid 6, something Switch sports themed, a significant title like Mario Maker for this year, and a fairly high profile game that is a plus game, probably I'd guess Luigi's Mansion 3, maybe Pikmin 4. Smaller titles are possible, and there are a lot of options that I've covered previously: Hotel Dusk, Famicom Detective Club, and so on. Some more niche recent classics like Ever Oasis or Dragalia Lost would hype people, but of course the baseline odds remain very low. Of course, there are all sorts of long shot surprises which are highly unlikely for any individual direct, but could be possible sooner or later, and so, in theory, they could drop at any time. Things like a game where Bowser is in the lead, which has to happen eventually, a Pikmin spin-off, again, which feels quite likely, indeed any new spin-off of a different major property, or indeed a new console reveal, although I personally don't expect them to have anything new console-wise for at least a year yet. And while I wouldn't get specific, there are still lots of possibilities from developers like Grezzo and Next Level Games. In previous videos I've talked Mario Strikers, Luigi's Mansion, and of course they could even have an original game. While I don't think they'll reveal big stuff like Animal Crossing or Splatoon 4 just yet, if they want to keep their powder dry on 3D Mario for some reason, then this would be a way to do it. Just bring out the next Animal Crossing with a long-term tease. And in fact, I do think there's a decent chance we will learn about Animal Crossing's future in the next 12 months so that they can promote it ahead of any Switch to Lite revision model. Finally, of course, I know sometimes people expect me to talk third parties, but frankly, I don't follow a lot of the third-party properties, and those third-party games I do try, I rarely enjoy as much as Nintendo's offering, so I tend to leave third-party speculation to wiser or more attuned minds. Inevitably, as soon as I finish this video up, I will think of a dozen things that I should have mentioned before, but broadly speaking, that wraps up my 5-part series on the coming Nintendo Direct. If the Direct is announced tomorrow, this will probably be my last video beforehand, although if we get to Wednesday and there's no news, then I do have another video in hand, and if I'm able to edit it up in time, there will be a slightly more whimsical, Direct-themed podcast exclusive to Patreon members. I'm sure there will be some more Direct videos afterwards as well. Before the end though, for people who enjoy my forecasts, here's a good trawl of my current predictions from this video and taking in ones from the last video too. As ever, they will be in 5 groups. 90% calls aren't always the ones that are the most exciting, as they're the ones I feel that are pretty rock solid, obviously, although even then, I can still be wrong and have been in the past. 70, 50 and 30% are my likely, mid and unlikely calls, and 10% is for the really random stuff that could happen, and indeed it has happened that about 1 in 10 of these do come off, so it's not a completely random selection, but even so, it's not necessarily something where I'd expect a lot of exciting stuff to happen. So let's go through. My 90% calls at this point: there is a June Direct of any kind. Koizumi or Takahashi will host the next General Direct. An existing Switch or Switch 2 game is promoted during the Direct. There will be at least 3 new first-party games revealed at the next General Nintendo Direct. New details or trailers will be revealed for Rhythm Heaven, Splatoon Raiders, and or Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. At 70%, Koizumi will primarily host the next Direct. The June Direct will A, exist, and B, be a General Direct. There will be 4 or more new first-party game reveals at the next General Direct. At least 1 new Nintendo Switch 2 edition will feature in the next General Direct. Zelda is mentioned or featured in any way in a June Nintendo Direct. Some kind of free upgrade for an existing game, such as Tomodachi Life, Pocopia, or Mario Kart, is introduced. Some kind of Nintendo Switch 2 announcement is given of any kind. The next General Direct will include at least 1 reveal for Beyond 2026. There'll be some reference to Duskbloods, and there'll be a Switch 1 reveal of some kind. My 50% calls, the word Galaxy will be mentioned at least once. There will be 6 or more new first-party games revealed at the next Nintendo Direct. Miyamoto will appear in a June Nintendo Direct. A new Zelda title, or remake, remaster, something like that, is featured in the June Direct. Amiibo are mentioned during the presentation. There'll be Nintendo Switch 2 editions for one of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Switch Sports, Super Mario Odyssey, and or Luigi's Mansion 3. 50% Metroid, Kirby, and or Fire Emblem are in August or September of this year. 50% a sports or fitness game is going to release by the end of 2026. 50% Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave receives a date in the next General Direct, and 50% also a Kirby game is revealed in a June 26 Direct. Then the 30% calls, Mario Kart World features in the next Direct. Something new from Pikmin, such as the Pikmin 4 Nintendo Switch 2 edition, is revealed in the June Direct. An old property return, such as Pushmo, Wario Land, Dr. Mario, or Wave Race. Tomodachi Life and or Pocopia feature in the next Direct. Star Fox and or Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave have Amiibo reveals in the June Direct. 2 or more Zelda games drop in the June Direct. Some reference is made to Metroid Prime 4 in the June Direct. The next mainline Kirby title is announced in the June Direct. Something new from Next Level Games is announced. Something Smash Brothers before the end of 2026, including potentially a Nintendo Switch Online re-release, is something that we will see. Something new from Grezzo or Tantalus appears in the Nintendo Direct. Hotel Dusk or another code are mentioned in a Direct. A new spin-off of an existing property is revealed in the next Direct. Some new reference to Platinum Games or one of their properties, including potentially from people, of course, who have left that company. Well, that would feature in the Direct as well. A 30% call as well is Nintendo Switch 2 editions for either Astral Chain, Bayonetta 3, Metroid Prime Remastered, Metroid Dread, and or new Pokemon Snap. 30% some kind of paid update for an existing game excluding Nintendo Switch 2 DLC. A new Arika or Indie Zero game is announced. A game shadow dropped or indeed released with a very short window to come, maybe a 3-week window, in the next General Direct. A new Brain Training or similar is revealed by the end of 2026. Some kind of Monolith Soft reveal in the next Direct. The playtest game being mentioned in the next Direct is my last 30% call. Okay, here are the 10% ones. A Nintendo Switch Online reorganization and or price hike revealed in the June Direct. A new Style Savvy in the Direct. A new Nintendo Classics console besides DS added in the Direct, and a separate 10% shout for Nintendo DS being added to Nintendo Classics in the next Direct. Punch-Out appearing, Eternal Darkness or Custom Robo appearing, Mario Plus Rabbids appearing, Picta Nico appearing, Pikmin 5 being mentioned, Famicom Detective Club or Famicom Fairy Tales mentioned, Pilot Wings or Kid Icarus appearing, Donkey Kong Bonanza being promoted, Dragalia Lost or Ever Oasis appearing, a new console reveal in the June Direct, just 10% there, a game with Bowser as the lead, a new game which turns out to be developed by Yasuyuki Ayagi, a mainline Splatoon being announced, Luigi's Mansion 4 being announced, I still don't rate that possibility, an EPD 8 developed game that isn't 3D Mario, a new Paper Mario being announced, the successor Zelda game to Tears of the Kingdom, i.e. the next big mainline Zelda, being announced, a Bayonetta Nintendo Switch 2 edition before the end of the year, Astral Chain Nintendo Switch 2 edition before the end of the year, a new ARMS before the end of 2026, Xenoblade 4 before the end of 2026. That's not just any Monolith Soft project, but specifically Xenoblade Chronicles 4. Wario Land being revealed by a Nintendo Direct in June 26. Kirby Planet Robobot announced in a June 26 Direct. A successor to Kirby in the Forgotten Land announced in a June 26 Direct. A mainline Animal Crossing being announced in a June 26 Direct. And Advance Wars being mentioned in the June Direct. Now, obviously, all of these specific percentage bands, they're designed to cover a wide area. So maybe some of these are more towards the 20% and the 30%, or more towards the 20% and the 10%. But all told, I'm aiming for roughly those kinds of patterns. And I will at some point do another review of my past forecasts, the ones that I did at the end of last year on the screen. And of course, you do need to wait a certain amount of time for Nintendo to actually reveal things so that you can assess how accurate things were, but perhaps I will look at that this summer or maybe sometime into the autumn. At any rate, that is it for the time being. Thank you so much for watching, commenting, liking, hyping, and all the good things you do, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.